All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. We've just seen one of the worst refereeing displays you're ever going to see. Abdullah Mason getting the round 12 TKO victory over Albert Bell in a very close fight, in a world title level fight, and the referee calls a halt to the action in that way. I thought it was a dreadful, awful decision. We're going to talk about the fight. We're going to talk about that refereeing performance, but we're going to start with Bruce Shushu Carrington and Rene Palacios. Shushu getting the victory 118 to 110, 117 to 111, 116 to 112 unanimously, and holding on to his WBC World Featherweight title and that brand new July 4th Featherweight WBC World title. But for Shushu Carrington, look, a dominant display. He was most definitely the better fighter on the night, but we watched it on live stream and it is up there with one of the most boring fights I've watched this year. Look, I find it hard to criticize Bruce Shushu Carrington. Like, he was by far the more skillful, more technical, better fighter on the night. He was all over him from start to finish. He sort of fell asleep. He was idling at the end of that fight, and Rene Palacios sort of won a few rounds. But look, they had opening scoring in that fight. So about 8-9 rounds into that fight, Shushu knew he was up by an absolute mile and just coasted to the end. That's when Rene Palacios actually came alive. He landed one good shot, a left hook to the body in the 11th round, which folded Bruce Shushu Carrington. There was also, I can't remember exactly what round. It was in the middle sort of rounds where Rene Palacios lands a right hand to the back of Bruce Shushu Carrington's head, which gets called a slip by the referee, but it was, a knockdown punch, but it was an illegal punch. So, a decision there would have been nice to have been made. It was either a knockdown in favor of Rene Palacios or it was a foul from Rene Palacios. And that's about all that Rene did. Like, I expected to see this guy come into that fight like William Zepeda, like, Isaac Pitbull Cruz, like Sebastian Hernandez, and just hammer and tong in the phone booth every single round, in your face, in your grill. Constant activity. But he almost came out asleep. Like, it wasn't until 7-8 rounds into that fight where we actually saw Palacios throw a few punches, start to show a little bit of hunger, a little bit of desire in that fight. And for Bruce Shushu Carrington, I mean, he'd won the opening 7, 8, 9 rounds with complete ease without having to really exert himself. He was happily fighting off the back foot. The jab was working nicely, knocking the head back of Rene Palacios, but he didn't have to do a whole lot to dominate that fight. And he was winning every single round until he was up by a mile. The open scorecards were there, and he found out, you know what, I don't really need to do anything at the end of this fight. You got to question a bit of the falling asleep at the end and the rips to the body. There's clearly a fragility there for Shushu Carrington to the body. But in terms of technical boxing, defense of the head, counter punching, it was a brilliant performance by Bruce Shushu Carrington. It just wasn't very entertaining. There wasn't a whole lot to talk about. There wasn't a whole lot to see. It was a dominant performance without doing anything entertaining. And you probably criticize Bruce Shushu Carrington for that. You say your opponent really didn't offer much at all. You were dominant. You were a much better fighter. You're a much more skillful fighter. Why weren't you a little bit more hungry, a little bit more, desiring that finish in that fight? Why were you content to coast to a 12-round unanimous decision? Why didn't you go in there and try and find that finish, show a bit of excitement, show that you are worlds and worlds above this guy? That's my criticism for Shushu. We know how good he is. And for me, I came into this fight saying I don't really want to see him taking on Palacios, but that's the opponent. Hopefully it's entertaining. It wasn't. There is one fight to make for Shushu, and it's the fight I want to see. It's the fight that everybody wants to see, and it is him versus Brandon Figueroa. I think that fight there, stylistically, a great matchup. It'd be an entertaining fight. Bruce Shushu Carrington will be on the back foot trying to catch and counter whilst trying to, stay away from that constant pressure of Brandon Figueroa. He's going to be in your face. He's tall. He's rangy. It's a harder thing. Like, stylistically, it's a harder fight stylistically to fight a guy that is that tall and is going to be in your face like that. And we know how good Brandon Figueroa is at ripping to the body. So I think that fight there is by far the best fight to make for Shushu Carrington and Brandon Figueroa. Hopefully they can put it together. Look, tonight, he was dominant in victory. It was no question that he won that fight, but we weren't entertained. We weren't astonished. It wasn't, you're never going to go back and watch it. And if you didn't watch that fight, go watch the highlights at most. It wasn't great. And I think a lot of that has to come down to Shushu. I want to see him be a little bit more hungry for the win. But let's talk about the main event. Abdullah Mason versus Albert Bell. A very odd finish to that fight. We'll talk about the fight, then we'll talk about the finish. For the first 5-6 rounds of that fight, Abdullah Mason maybe won the first round, but he definitely didn't win any other rounds. And if you gave Albert Bell the first round, then you've given him the first 6 rounds of that fight, pretty much. First 5 or 6 rounds were all Albert Bell. Abdullah Mason was headhunting. He was searching for the big shot, none of which landed, none of which came. And Albert Bell was, encouraging the pressure from Abdullah Mason and landing quick, short, sharp shots, whether it was a short uppercut, a short hook, a short straight. He was doing the 2-1 constantly and then pivoting back to the middle of the ring and then inviting the pressure once again. It was a brilliant game plan from Albert Bell. He kept moving. Because of how tall and long he is, Abdullah Mason couldn't find the head at all. It was an awkward sort of moment for Abdullah Mason not being able to find that punch on Albert Bell. And Albert Bell looked like he was going to be able to sort of find a decision victory. He looked like, all right, we'll keep this up. Abdullah Mason looks a bit naive, a little bit inexperienced, a little bit lost for how to fight a fighter like this. Albert Bell was showing his experience, showing that he knows how to fight a guy like Abdullah Mason, showing that he is that, 28-0 fighter that is going to, finally have his moment in the sun. And then comes round 7, round 8, round 9, round 10, where all of a sudden Albert Bell looks completely and entirely fatigued. His work rate goes down very, very quickly. And all of a sudden, Abdullah Mason has the ascendancy. He starts ripping to the body, what he should have been doing for the whole entire fight, constantly ripping to the body, fatiguing Albert Bell more and more and more. Come round 12, comes out like a bull in a china shop, chases him down 10, 15 seconds into that final round, has him up against the rope, starts ripping to the body, and then goes upstairs and lands a beautiful left hook to drop Albert Bell. And Albert Bell, on top of the fatigue, on top of the tiredness, on top of the broken nose that he sustained in about round 9, round 10, is looking out of sorts. Gets up though, keeps moving around. And then, Abdullah Mason lands a softish sort of, I wasn't even sure whether it was a knockdown in the first sort of instance, another left hand that sort of drops Albert Bell, but you thought it wasn't much of a shot. It wasn't as clean as the first one. Albert Bell should be able to get up to his feet. And the referee looks at him and then just calls the fight off without doing any count, without checking if, let him get to 8, let him move around, see what you've got. You've got a fight there where many people had Albert Bell level on points, if not just ahead going into that 12th round. Of course, you've got to factor in the knockdown, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway. But that's a world title level fight. That is the biggest occasion in this guy's life, and you've called the fight like that off a shot that I didn't think there was much of it, without giving him a count, without giving him a chance to get up. Awful, dreadful fucking decision. And Albert Bell, I thought, fought very, very valiantly in that fight. I think the fatigue probably has a lot to do with the fact that he isn't a very active fighter. He hasn't really fought 12 rounds. And on top of that, I think people underestimate the fact that he was preparing to take on Andy Cruz in 2 weeks' time. His training camp was cut short by 2 weeks. And I think a lot of that stuff, although you can't get ultra fit in another 2 weeks, it's still another 2 weeks to get ready for a fight. And I think all of these elements played a role in his fatigue. Abdullah Mason capitalized on the fatigue, ripping to the body beautifully. But you do have to question some of the stuff from Abdullah Mason. The first 6 rounds, he looked dreadful. Like I said, he looked naive. He looked a little bit lost out of ideas. And his inexperience probably showed a little bit there. He didn't quite know how to deal with it. Look, you got to give him credit because he adjusted, he changed it up, and he found a way to win the fight, not only by a decision, but he's found the stoppage, whether it was right or wrong. He ended the night with a finish on Albert Bell, retains his title, overcomes the adversity of being a little bit lost in the first sort of 6 rounds of that fight, which is a long time, and you can't ever afford to do that in a world title fight, because if that was Joe Cordina today, obviously Joe Cordina a very different fighter than Albert Bell, but if you're 6 rounds down to Joe Cordina, you're not winning that fight. So, Abdullah Mason's got to count his blessings a little bit. Look, he showed what he had to do late in that fight, but the opening did send a few question marks around him. A good performance. Like, if you just watch the second half of that fight, you'd say, what a great performance by Abdullah Mason. Beautiful rips to the body, folds him in half in the 12th round, gets 2 knockdowns, and finishes the fight. It is just those opening few rounds where you're looking at him and saying, he keeps headhunting, he's searching for a big shot, and it's not coming. He looks a little bit inexperienced, a little bit naive. Look, he's the youngest champion in the world right now. And he's going to keep growing and getting better and better and better. And I give him credit because he is such a young champion. Some of these guys that we see in the world right now, like Ben Whitaker, who's 28 years of age, a silver medalist, and we're still sort of babying him. Diego Pacheco, with the amount of fights that he's had, and we're still sort of babying him. It's like, this guy here is the youngest world champion in the world. He's taken on a guy that's completely different to what he prepared for on short notice. He doesn't have to risk that. He doesn't have to do that. He didn't want to take on Albert Bell, but he stepped up to the plate. He took the fight. It was uncomfortable. It wasn't pretty, but he found a way to find the finish. And I think that shows the type of fighter that Abdullah Mason is. And I hope that shows you the credit that I am giving him. For as much as he looked terrible in the opening of that fight, it all came home. It all came home. He found that finish in the 12th round. Dreadful decision by the referee. But in terms of my scorecard, I think I did on live stream. I think I had it exactly level after the 10th. And then, yeah, something like that. It was close enough that the knockdown from Abdullah Mason in the 12th round would have secured the victory for him. Without the knockdown, he probably was looking at a draw. But with the knockdown, it was a definite win. So you really can't have any complaints about Abdullah Mason tonight. Look, he's going to grow from that. He's going to keep getting better. It wasn't a great night of boxing, I'll be honest with you. That fight, Abdullah Mason versus Albert Bell, wasn't the greatest fight you're ever going to see. And Shushu Carrington was a snooze fest. So if you didn't watch those fights, maybe go watch the highlights. You're not really missing anything. Shushu Carrington wins a dominant victory. Abdullah Mason most definitely gets out of jail, and a dreadful, awful fucking refereeing display. Guys, let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'm out of here, guys. See ya!